Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm here with an August wrap-up video, and I was all set to have a very leisurely, very relaxed chat with you, and I've made my cup of tea and I've run really out of time, so I'll make it quite quick and not as relaxing for me. I probably won't get to drink the tea, but there you go. That's the story of my life. So the first book is Fault Lines by Emily Itami, and I can't remember, I did a July-August wrap-up earlier this month, so I can't remember if I did talk about this one, but I really enjoyed it. So this came recommended, I got it at Imprints Bookshop, one of my favourite bookshops in Adelaide, and it was recommended by Laura Croach, who used to be the director of Adelaide Writers Week, and she's never let me down with her recommendations. So I got it purely for that reason. And Emily Itami is a Japanese-American author, so I think she's based in the States now and grew up in partly Tokyo, or is it London that she is now? I feel like I have to check this. She grew up in Tokyo before moving to London. So there you go. So forget the American bit. And this book is set in Tokyo. So it's interesting that the author has grown up there. So it has a real sense of place and really lots of details and just layers and bits of the language and the food and the culture that really make the book what it is, that I think you couldn't put that in unless you'd lived there. That's my impression. So this is about Mizuki, who's a Japanese housewife, but she's very constrained by the expectations of society on her to be a good wife, to be proper, to be a good mother and do the right things in the lunchbox for her children, and all these tiny, tiny little things that make up the day that everyone expects of her, including their families. And she used to be a singer, and she used to be a lot more out there, and she's lived in New York. Maybe that's what confused me with the author, but the Mizuki, the character, had previously lived in New York, and she just feels a bit different to all the other women around her in Tokyo, in her social circle. And then she meets a man, I think his name is Kiyoshi, and they meet quite just serendipitously one night, and she cautiously starts I don't want to say an affair, but just starts meeting up with him, and he owns a restaurant and lives in it's just a different world for her, and she feels a real connection to him. But so it's not a new plot or new story in the sense of, bored wife meets a much more interesting man, for example, but it's just the way that it's told. It's the setting in Tokyo, it's her dry sense of humour, and it's very tightly written, so you can see it's not a long book. And she's a really engaging, flawed character. She makes some poor choices, and she's not always likeable, but she's a really engaging, interesting character to spend time with. So I really enjoyed this, and I'm recommending it to people because I think it's gone under the radar a little bit. So that's Fault Lines by Emily Itami. Then I think next, I can't remember what order I read these, but next, The Labyrinth by Amanda Lohrey. I do feel like I've spoken about this. I think I did a whole video about this just recently with the reader likes for it. So Annie and I did this on the podcast. It just won the Miles Franklin Literary Award in Australia that's excellence in Australian fiction. Amanda Lohrey's an Australian author. She's based in Tasmania. This is a beautiful novel. It is meditative and precise and quiet in a way, but don't let that put you off. It is not boring at all. It's really compelling. You're drawn along with this narrator. Erica Marsden, as she moves to the beach town to be near her son, who's been imprisoned for a severe criminal act, and she doesn't want to engage with people because she's obviously had such a harrowing time, and she's really gone through an enormous amount of trauma and grief and stress, but she gets drawn into the community, and she's a very dry character, really doesn't suffer fools symbols and really interesting. So I loved this. I found it very comforting to read, but also thought-provoking and a worthy winner of the Miles Franklin. So that's The Labyrinth, and I might link it below, a whole video about this one, so you can check that out. And moving on to the Booker Prize long list readings, so Sunjeev Sahota, China Room, and I loved Sunjeev Sahota's book The Year of the Runaways, which I read in London. I think I read it in 2016. That was a 2015 release. Really lively, engaging, full of these characters that came to life, sprang off the page, and it was a window into a world of being a refugee from memory. It was refugees living in London and trying to carve out a new life, and how difficult that was. I could have the facts slightly wrong, but it really opened my eyes. But at the same time, it was just a very engaging story told with great, energy and warm-hearted. And this is quite different. It's a much quieter book, and I did not get on with it, but I had an interesting time with it. So at first I DNF'd it, and then I came back and just found that it was such beautiful prose, and it did pick up a bit towards the end, and I did find that the tension built up and the characters started to be a bit stronger, and I was a bit more engaged with it. But it's a story, it's two strands of the story. One is back in the past and it's set in India. It's Meher, who is in an arranged marriage with three brothers, with two other women, girls, they're only about 14, but with three brothers, but they don't know which one is their husband, but they just meet up with them in the China Room, in this dark room, and she's trying to work out which one it is, and falls in love with the one she assumes is her husband. And you can see that this might come unstuck, and there's a Shakespearean sort of tone to that bed hopping sort of scenario. And then in the present day, or not present day, but in 1999, a young man is trying to get over his heroin addiction and goes to India, where his family is originally from, and tries to withdraw and stays on a farm. And that didn't really engage me as much, partly because withdrawing from heroin, that sort of process is quite difficult and repetitive and harrowing and boring in one sense, and that did feel that way sometimes reading those sections, and of course that does improve, but yeah, that didn't seem to have as much point to it, whereas the original story of Meher, I hope I've got her name right, is a bit more, you feel for her a little bit more, and you want to see what happens to her. But overall, it's a sort of a so-so book for me, because the writing is exquisite and it is really beautifully, finely wrought, and he is such a compassionate writer, and the sense of place was there. Everything was sort of pitch perfect. It was just that there wasn't enough story for me, and it was so subtle and so quiet that it just didn't keep my attention, unfortunately. But I do love Sunjeev Sahota, so I'll definitely read whatever he writes next. And that was China Room. And I also love the cover. So a lot of things to love about this one, and I was sort of sad not to enjoy it more, but there you go. That's China Room. And then Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, translated by Elisabeth Jacquette. And this is the book that's in the Women in Translation Readathon, and it's the read-along book for the Readathon, if that's right, hosted by Kendra Winchester and Matthew Sharappa, and insert literary pun here. And I found this good I don't think I really got it. So it's again two stories, but instead of being woven into each other, you hear one and then the other story. So it's two sections. So the first section is an Israeli soldier, and he is in 1949 near the Egyptian border, takes a girl hostage and assaults her, and I don't know if I should spoil what happens, but it doesn't end well for the Bedouin girl. And then the second section is a young Palestinian woman who becomes obsessed with this story and decides to investigate it, which is quite a dangerous journey because she's only her movements are restricted to area A, and she has to cross into area B, and she needs a different identity card and things like that, and she goes on this journey. And again, a quiet book in the sense that it's just their interior experience, and there's not much interaction with other characters, there's not much dialogue, if any, and it's very quiet and understated and subtle, and everything's happening between the lines or sort of off the page. There are some recurring motifs like a dog barking and a few things like that to just echo from the second part what was in the first part. And it is sinister, and it does have a tension to it, and it's very cleanly written, and it propels you forward. And it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, so it's been on my radar, since then, and a lot of people I think have raved about it. J.M. Coetzee says on the back that the way that she has written it, the form that she's used, her method justifies itself fully as the book reaches its heart-stopping conclusion. And likewise, one of the other reviewers talks about this crescendo that it builds up to. And whilst there is a dramatic ending to the book, it's, again, because of the tone of the book, sort of quietly done. And I think because I wasn't feeling for the characters, it's got a very distant, sort of cool tone, and so I wasn't really feeling it, and I didn't get the crescendo. And then I've had other people say they have to reread it because there were so many body blows that they have to go back and read it again. And I feel like I've missed something. So I'd love to know what you thought if you've read it. I did appreciate it, but I think some of it was lost on me because it was so subtle. And so I'm curious to know if there was something I missed, or if it was just that I wasn't fully, just didn't feel for the characters enough to have all the feelings. But let me know. That was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli and translated by Elisabeth Jacquette, and a beautiful translation. So I can see why it was shortlisted. That is it. I'm out of time. I haven't had a sip of tea as we predicted, but look forward to hearing what you've been reading, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.